The Short Show. It's another one. Listen, remember, we need you to write to us an email, Shawn@aletheamedia.com. Give us your name, full name, and your first and last name, and give us the location in which you live, state or country, because we're making some changes, big ones, and you're going to want to be part of those changes next year if you like our ministry and outreach. So we'll be announcing that at the beginning of next year. So we only got about 3 months left. So write us. 4 or 5 years ago, my wife, Mary, and I, we moved from Huntington Beach, California to Salt Lake City so that we could be closer to the ministry and devote all of our time instead of me flying back and forth, which we did for quite a while. And we moved into an old industrial building that's been renovated into small little places downtown, and we nestled into 450 square feet of pure concrete bliss. But needless to say, in such a setting, when you're in a building that's been renovated, you're going to have neighbors in close proximity, sharing walls, etc. And right next door to us lived a young neighbor, and I'm just going to call him Al. All right, just for convenience sake, Al lived there, and he was tall and he was athletically built, a handsome young man in his mid to late 20s. And but right off the bat, you know, when we would see Al, we'd say hi, and he'd just be like, and we'd get in the elevator with him, and he'd grumble out maybe just a, and we'd say, "How are you?" He wouldn't even talk; he'd just go, and he just really was quite a jerk, just to be honest. And he had an attractive live-in girlfriend who was friendly, and but from the start, this guy was indifferent to our existence, and he was abrupt. And those characteristics just grew. He just became more and more rude and abrupt over the years. And I'm kind of personally sensitive to rebuffs and rejection from people where there's no reason for it. If I've insulted you, I understand a rebuff and rejection. But to just reject somebody's person because there's something you don't like about them externally really drives me crazy. It's something that I just have a hard time dealing with, a character flaw. And so add into the fact that a lot of shady characters started coming in and out of his place at all hours of the night, and sometimes people would smoke in his place and we could smell it, and that's against the rules of our complex. And so I found myself in my mind kind of gunning for him. I was hoping to see him in another setting and to kind of call him out, you know, and say, "What's wrong with you? Why are you so brutally rude?" And take him down a notch. That's a couple years, right? Time went by, he became more irresponsible. He left a car out on the street in a free parking space for so long that the city decided to put a meter there because they thought it had been taken advantage of by the neighbors. That ticked everybody off because we lost our free space. I was just furious with the guy. And he would disappear and then he'd show back up. And about a year ago, my wife and I saw him, and he was really broken down. His face was sallow and yellow. His skin didn't look good. His athletic build had shrunken a little bit in a very short period of time. And we watched and listened as a parade of drug dealers and drug users would come in and out of his place, and how the ravages of that lifestyle started to take hold on him. And we had to call the police a couple times. A woman screaming in the hall that he was attacking her, and another time thumping for hours with his hand on the wall because he was high in his shower and he just was hitting the wall, and we could hear it all night. We called the cops, they came. And I told him, "Hey, Al, this is because we're a little concerned about your turn of events. You're not doing so well." And so one day, about 8 months ago, I got in the elevator and we're going up to our floor, and Al got in. And I just say to him, my heart is always angry at him, But something came over me that was more Christian-like, and I just wanted to break through, and so I said, so what's the drug? And I said, meth. And he said, opioids. And I said, that's a bummer. He goes, and he was all shit. Yeah. It's hard. I'm trying to get over it though. It's very messed up in how he talks now. Real perfect specimen, now broken down to being kind of a golem in 3 or 4 years. And I said, I don't know where you are in your mind toward spiritual things, but I kind of pastor a small church here in town. And he kind of sparked up. He's like, oh, really? I said, yeah, and you're always welcome, Al, to come by. He was like, thanks, man. A very different response from him. And he actually showed some real interest. And so I went into our place and I wrote down the time and day, and I went by later that night and knocked on his door, and he opened it, and I said, this is where we meet, no pressure. But you're welcome to come. Now, what happened, and the reason I'm sharing this with you, is because nothing had really substantially changed between the person of Al and the person of Shawn McCraney. But the person of Shawn McCraney decided, I'm guessing by the Holy Spirit, to just step out of his own way and will and anger and try to reach out to the guy. In Jesus' name, in the cause of Christ. And when I did that, something changed in my heart toward Al. And it changed in my wife's heart toward him. We started to see him as maybe our own child. We started to see him as somebody who needed care, and he knew that when we called the police and the police knocked on his door and he opened the door, I'm standing there and the police said, your neighbor's worried about you. And he looks at me and he says, like, I know, I'm sorry. I'm just hitting my wall. And he knew, just by the words reaching out to him, trying to be honest, trying to break through and show love and concern. And so the point of the message is that we change when we choose to follow love. Circumstances and people don't necessarily change, but you change your own heart when you choose to go and approach people the way God would have you approach them, rather than from your angry, vengeful heart, which is what I carried for the guy for 3 years or 4 years. And that's the shame in the story, is that all of that time I could have been seeing him in a different light, seeing him as somebody who needed help, seeing him as someone who needed love, rather than as this reprobate drug addict that was imposing upon my life. So we began to take a Christian interest in him. Months went by, and Al would show up in the car park high as a kite and in the elevator, and we would talk more openly, and he was willing to, hey, yeah, how you doing, man? And just asking how he was doing and seeing if we could help. And then he disappeared again. And last week, our neighbor told us that Al died. He overdosed. And we were really saddened by the news and somewhat confronted by the fact that we wasted an awful lot of time being angry and judgmental and condemnatory toward the guy, when we could have just overstepped that immediately and taken his rudeness as an indication that he was struggling. Not that there's something insulting to us, but that he had the problem, and just bring Jesus into the mix. Friday morning, I left my place. I'm walking down the hall, and I look to the left, and the door is open, and his door was never, ever open. And I looked inside, and all the blinds were up, and light was shining in, and there was a woman on a stepladder. And she was scrubbing the wall absently. And I stuck my head in, and she looked at me. I've never met her before. And she said, "You're the preacher." I was stunned that Al told, who I would later find out was his mother, that he and I had 2 short interactions about hope, and that they would mean so much to him that he actually shared them with his mom, and that his mom knew what I did just by virtue of him sharing that. It must have meant something to him. We don't think our words mean anything. We don't think when we show love and kindness and concern and invite people to come to do, we think it falls on deaf ears. It doesn't. That's another thing that blew me away, is that he remembered this and he shared it with his mother, which is the third thing I learned in this, is that for every drug addict and every alcoholic and every bum on the street and every vile, rude person who are struggling with things, they all have mothers. And she cried in the apartment and she said, Al was a good guy. Al had a lot going for him. He was going to law school and he played basketball and he was handsome and tall and great. And only 2 or 3 years ago got addicted to drugs. And only in those 2 or 3 years did he spiral down to a place where it ultimately overtook him in her home, where she was the one who gave him CPR. And I watched a mother tell me the story of her son in his late 20s who had passed, and who somehow was told that I briefly reached out to this kid. The lessons are mind-blowing if you care about using your existence to better the world through Christ. That to sit back in anger and vengeance and attitudes and to condemn. I mean, I was calling him a trust fund kid that his mom and dad bought him a place, and he was a loser, and he's a scum, and he's a drug abuse. I had all of that in my head and heart until the Spirit just had me speak to him as a human being and just ask the simple question, what's the drug? And I walked away from that mother telling me how he had passed and all the circumstances about his life and trying to kick, and how he got a hold of some bad stuff after being off of it for 60 days and doing really well. And I walked away, just another lesson learned, that what is going on in us needs to take a step back to what's going on in other people's lives, and that we don't react to rudeness and to indifference and to drug addiction and to people who are different and rude and mean, that we act, don't react, and we act in love. And we extend ourselves over and over and over again. And we might not get anything back, but it is doing something. It is planting something hopeful in the hearts of even the most recalcitrant, even the most addicted, even the most lost. It gives them something. Those words give them a life. And that's the lesson learned for me this week. We're done.